Let's go.
Dr. Rosie Milligan, one of the most sought-after speakers on the circuit today. Her live internet talk show, Express Yourself, is the most provocative, thought-provoking, and talked-about radio show on the internet. There's no holds barred, and Dr. Milligan puts the B in bold. She brings it every Tuesday live at 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Rosie has been proclaimed the most provocative female writer of the century. Her books include Satisfying the Black Man and Black Woman Sexually Made Simple, Why Black Men Choose White Women, and the book Nigga Please. These books have raised eyebrows across the country. She has authored 21 books and published 350 titles for authors nationwide. Check Dr. Rosie out at drrosie.com for her books, articles, and archives of her internet talk show. Sit at the feet of wisdom. Dr. Milligan is indeed a timekeeper and scorekeeper. She is the clock, calendar, and almanac for Black America. You need to hear her.
Well. Good morning. Top of the morning for sunny California. You're listening to the Express Yourself Hour. I am your host, Dr. Rosie Milligan, coming to you live with nothing but straight talk. You know, that's how we do it around here. And my co-hosts are the wonderful, the AI man. They call him Mr. Keith Swanson. People keep looking for him. They don't believe he's real. He's been out in public, but nobody been able to catch him and say, hey, I got him. And there was money on the table for that. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning, Dr. Rosie. Yeah, I showed up twice and nobody even talked to me. So.
I guess they don't want the money. All right. There's my other co-host here, Shawana Bourne-May, the real estate guru.
She's not. She's out there making money, so she hasn't closed that deal yet.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm really excited this morning. I say, like my daddy always says, when something good is about to happen, the devil sure is busy trying to jump in the way this morning. I'm so excited about our show and about our guests today. And I've told so many people, and I know they're going to be listening to hear Dr. Johnson. So let me jump right in it and introduce my guest today, Dr. T Hasan Johnson. He's a father, a Black masculinist scholar. He's an associate professor in Africana studies at Cal State University in Fresno, founder and lead scholar at the Institute for Black Male Studies, founder and chief officer, the ONYX Network TV channel. We are so happy to have him back again. Good morning, Dr. Johnson.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Really excited, glad to have you here today, and we're going to talk about what every Black boy needs to know to survive in today's world. And I'm so passionate about getting this information out. Some years ago, Dr. Johnson, my sister and 5 defense attorneys in Atlanta got together because they were tired of hearing people talking about what was happening to Black boys. So they decided to do something about it. So they wrote a series of books called This Is Not Cool, Legal Lessons for Youth and Their Parents. And all the books they have written is for parents and the youth. And she said to me, sometimes the parents become part of the problem because what they don't know, and they say to their children, well, they can't do this to you, because what they don't know. So, in fact, I'm going to send you all of her books. I think you will enjoy that. But I'm happy to have you today because too many Black boys are reared by their mother or grandmother. Therefore, they lack the skills needed for survival. And the best mother in the world, I'm going to say this, you guys, because women always talk about I'm the mother and the father. You cannot be the mother and the father. You can be a good mother. Sure, there's a lot of things you can teach your son. But don't ever feel like, you are all that and a bag of chips without having a man in your son's life. So, Dr. Johnson, take it away and talk to us this morning.
Well, it's interesting you say that because that's a war that happens every year on Mother's Day and Father's Day. So it's interesting to see that. It still hasn't died down, unfortunately. But as far as this whole question of boys, this is something that is very close to my heart. My son is actually graduating from high school tomorrow. So I've been reflecting on this even before you reached out to me, very recently in terms of just this whole question. And I think for the most part, a lot of the boys that I do work with, young men, be they, whether they're coming into college or I'm engaging them informally, many of them do not have a support mechanism. They don't have a support system. They don't have a collective, most particularly of men around them to help socialize them into the expectations of manhood and whatnot. So there's a lot of different areas to this we can kind of touch on, but I wanted to at least put that on the table as a starting point that, we talk about a village, in many ways, but much of the time we don't apply that, especially as it applies to Black boys. And you can see this in terms of graduation rates. You can see this in terms of, issues regarding socialization. And as you pointed out, boys trying to figure out what role they play in a family void of men, right? So these are all issues that we really need to get to. But that first framework, that first, approach to this really has to be about what kind of network is available for boys that helps facilitate their transition into manhood and does so in a way that doesn't leave them as rugged individuals fighting against the system by themselves.
Dr. Johnson, are there groups out there doing what they call rites of passage? I remember some years ago, at least there was some work toward this, trying to show young men, where they should be at a certain age, which I think it should be rites of passage developed for all of us as African Americans. Rites of passage for children, for parents, for grandparents. I think we all need to recognize there's a role that we need to play to have a healthy society.
Definitely. I've known a number of brothers who facilitated those kind of programs, sometimes for decades. The interesting thing about it is what they've kind of reported, and this is nothing that I've published. It's just been conversations with them about what their work is. One of the main oppositions they have, of course, is, funding and making sure they can continue as an institution. But the other part often comes in the forms of mothers themselves, especially when these boys express difficulty. So as it was explained to me by one long-term program runner for a rites of passage, kind of program, he talked about how initially when he gets hold of the boys, it's not until they're a little older, whereas he would like to work with them, much younger. He doesn't get them until they're about 16, 17. And this is usually after there's a lot of, conflict going on in the house, a lot of, strife kind of going back and forth. And then once, the men in his program can actually start working with these boys, one of the things they have to do is apply pressure. They have to take him out of his comfort zone. They have to put him in a situation he's not comfortable in and then kind of apply pressure. And once he calls his mother and says things are difficult, these, program directors will tell me she'll be the first one to pull him when things start to get a little difficult, when he starts to get a little pressure applied to him by a collective of men who actually have his best interests at heart. But when you're going through an initiation, like a rites of passage, you don't really understand that. You're just going through it, and there's a point where you start to experience pressure. So that said, once they complain, they get pulled out, and these men will tell me over and over again, those are the ones they hear from years later that have gotten into trouble. But sometimes that overprotective kind of element to it can be difficult. And this is even something that male child care providers, uncles who are asked to take over the rearing of young teenage boys once they become too difficult. This is something they've complained about too, and fathers as well. If they can't get custody or get control of the environment of where these boys are at a young enough age, by the time they get them, they're almost grown, and there's just a little too much difficulty there. So the overprotecting can sometimes be a hindrance to the type of initiation these young boys need.
I know you're telling the truth about that because I recall I had a cousin and her husband wanted to, well, he was the stepfather, but there was things he was trying to teach the boys. He would have them to go outside and to do the lawn and help with trees and stuff. They were growing stuff in the back, and they would come in the house and sit down and look at her all pitiful. It's hot out there, and she would go out and say, well, you working them too hard. They're not in Africa. They can't work like you. So they just pulled her string every time he wanted them to do things that young boys should be doing and teaching them the way they should be. She interfered. And I see that, Dr. Johnson, all the time. And I wish so bad that women would understand that, and it needs to be more dialogue of that. Just walk away. Don't be in their presence sometime when they're being disciplined, because they know you're going to jump in, And that's why they just got to have men in their life. I don't care what anybody say. It doesn't have to be a father. It could be an uncle. It could be someone at their church. It just amazed me to see these young men, even in a church sometime, and there's nobody to reach out. You see that they're coming. They don't have a father. Have you ever thought about taking them bowling or doing something, asking them about school? It amazed me.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. It's one of those things that we have to really look at, the role of policy in this. Because I have a book coming out in August, and one of the things I talk about in that book is the role policies played to produce the current Black family. It's not an accident. It's not arbitrary, especially as it pertains to males, right? When it comes to, if we look at this in this context, sons and fathers, right? The absence of fathers is one of the key elements that causes this dilemma. But, the only paradigm in the Black community we use to talk about this is the deadbeat dad framework. And this is something that I've seen popularized, especially in the 70s and the 80s, as it applies to trying to understand Black men. But we don't actually look at the role of policy. We don't look at men's reactions to family court. We don't look at men's reactions to the shifts in birth control. We look at it as just something that Black men woke up one day and decided to be trifling. These are the kind of common tropes used to understand this. But in reality, this had a lot to do with a response to policy that did not account for men's experiences. So as men began to withdraw from marriage and formal family production, this had a direct impact on the family. And of course, in this context, this part of the discussion we're having, on boys. Right? And their transition into manhood, their understanding of what role manhood is. And much of that does have to do with being in direct contact. It's a very key thing that we take for granted when it comes to learning about being a man, learning about what role to play in a family. If you look at a functional family and a young man is actually observing his parents, particularly his father, how does the day-to-day go? If you've never grown up in an environment, a functional environment with a married, a set of parents, so on and so forth, there are things you don't learn, right? How do you engage the day to day? How do you argue in a way that doesn't destroy the family? How is affection extended on a regular basis, and what does that look like? These things sound like things, that everybody should just kind of know, but that's not how it works. This is something you have to experience. You have to witness. And if you're not able to witness those things, you're not able to figure out how to participate in the expected role that you have as a young man transitioning into manhood. And the reality is there are a lot of social expectations on Black men that many are not prepared for. Right? They don't understand, we're not told how to become these things, but it's an expectation. So by the time you enter the dating world, and this has been something we've been hearing since the 1980s, you got to make a certain amount of money. You got to own property. You got to do this. You got to do that. And then there are other expectations that we can talk about as we go. But if you've not been socialized in an environment to learn these things, you're wholly unprepared, and that's kind of the problem.
Dr. Johnson, how do you think that young men feel? I hear young men talk about they don't have a girlfriend. They're not dating because I don't have enough money. I'm hearing that so often, and when I hear women say to their teenage girls, well, if he can't take you out, if he can't pay for you to go to the movie, then you don't need to go with him. Something we have to call a national convention just for Black folks to learn how to act and how to relate to each other. How do you expect a teenager to be able to take your daughter out and wine and dine her? Where's he supposed to get the money? Where is it? What's wrong with you? Number one, you need to give your daughter money for herself. You know, because sometimes when people start putting something into you, they expect something in return. It's so much that we really need to get together. So a lot of young men seem very confused, even about dating, or they feel like they got to drop out of school to get a car, or they have to dress a certain way. What is going on?
Yeah, the social expectations have just really, in the last few decades gone into a realm of, fiction. One of the things I notice I do in my class is I will ask the women in my class and the men in my class different questions about where they are and what's going on. And, one of the things that I've found that's been holding true and consistent for years is that the expectations of young men, so we're talking 17, 18, in their first year of college, the rhetoric they're hearing is that they need to be six-figure earners to date the women sitting next to them. Now, how realistic that is for a 17-year-old kid who's in his first year of college and is often the first in his family to go to college. These kind of expectations being put on the table. These are things that, girls are coming in with. They're learning this from media. They're learning this from family. But this is the rhetoric. Even if they don't necessarily mean it or know what it means, this is one of the things they've learned to say. And these young men are wholly unprepared for that. And the truth is, if we actually, applied that same standard generations ago, few of us would be here right now. My grandmother never required my grandfather to make six figures to be a worthy mate. That was never a realistic thing. But now that's the language that these youth have grown up on, and some of their parents have as well. I mean, I'm Gen X, so I heard this language in the 80s. Now we're in 2023. My son is still hearing this language. So this expectation is wholly fictional, but it is something that young men are hearing. And again, there's no frame of reference for how they're supposed to achieve that necessarily, especially since men, if you're going to do it, don't generally do so until after 40. And that's only less than 10% of men that are able to do it. But that's the rhetoric that these young men hear.
I've heard women say in the presence of their daughters, and this in relation, we're talking about relationships. I've heard them say to teenagers, young adults, when they start talking about money that a person would have, and they go, well, he got to pay the late. I mean, just ignorant talk that's still out there. And people don't believe that women are talking like this now. But what saddened me, Dr. Johnson, is when you have a young, like you say, the role model, when you have young women trying to tell a young man what it is to be a man. You're not a man because you can't do this. Now they're trying to tell him how to be something that they have never seen.
Yeah.
And the young man feel like because she's, loud talking with it, he feel like somehow she knows what she's talking about. So here go his self-esteem about whether he's a man or not. If he doesn't live up to what this female is saying, well, you're not a man because you can't do this. You're not a man. How does that play into it? How does trying to be a man based on society standard is leading black boys on the wrong track with trying to have more than what they have, and sometimes end up in prison behind that?
Yeah, I mean, trying to live up to, and this is something that I know Keith speaks to as well. I mean, they're trying to live up to unrealistic standards, and much of the time it leads them either to prison or to something we're seeing with a lot of young men where they're checking out. We're seeing the dwindling numbers of young men going to college, the dwindling numbers of young men, especially after the pandemic, performing. My son just told me last night about his high school. He said one of the things the vice principal just told him yesterday was that they usually have over a 95% graduation rate. He said right now they're at 81. And that's just at his school. They've dropped in the last 2 years to about 81%. And he was telling me about so many of his friends that will not be graduating with him because, they've just really pulled back and just kind of lost interest, lost, drive. The parents are not able to maintain the same kind of connection, so we're seeing this kind of taking place, especially with men. And the language they're getting from popular culture and even from administrators and educators is that they're weak, they're toxic, they're falling behind because there's something inherently wrong with them, especially black young men are getting this language. And it's becoming, really, I think the response from many younger men is just to check out. It's not limited to younger men, but since that's the subject of today's conversation, many of them are withdrawing and checking out. Now, women are picking up, even young women are picking up on the language being used against these black young men, and they're applying it from their own vantage point, which I generally refer to as a kind of selective traditionalism. In other words, you have this, again, this has been happening since the 80s and really 70s, but you have this idea about independent womanhood and whatnot. Women can take any role in the relationship or the family they want. They can get married, they can be single, they can have kids, they can not, they can adopt, they can abort, they can, they have all these options in a relationship or family environment. Men really don't. Our social expectations are still rooted in like the 50s. I mean, you're still expected to provide even if she makes more than you. This is something grown men have reported to me, where the saying is, your money is the family's money, her money is her money. Even if she makes more than you, you're still required to handle all the necessities. So we have these selective, traditional kind of expectations where men are still supposed to provide a 1950s male framework, but women don't reciprocate. They get to do whatever they want. And this does not lead to a sustainable situation in a relationship or a family, especially when you have generations of young men hearing this and trying to figure out what role they're supposed to play. Right? Traditional relationships had a give and take. They had a back and forth. They were reinforcing of one another. But you can't just eliminate one's participation and then expect the male in particular to make it all work. And these are some of the kind of things that we're seeing, in this kind of dynamic. So boys and young men and older men, for that matter, are checking out. And people have never experienced this. Even in the black community, particularly amongst the nationalist community, we have really, what we've done with men is whenever men have not performed well, we double down on shaming and critiquing them and telling them we just need to be stronger and stand up and work harder. That type of thing is falling to the wayside because it's leading to a kind of John Henryism where these young men are tired of seeing their uncles and fathers dying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We got three callers on hold.
Okay, we're going to take some calls. Let me give the number out again.
And callers, please mute. Thank you.
Yes, please mute. 310-928-7733. The technician going to have to drop whoever has the line open.
Somebody has a line open. 750, please mute. Okay, they muted.
Okay, it's 323-7. The call-in number is 310-928-7733, 310-928-7733. We're speaking with Dr. T. Hasan Johnson. He's a father. He's associate professor in Africana Studies at Cal State Fresno, founder of the Lead Scholar Institute of Black Male Studies. He has his own talk show, and he has his finger on the pulse of what's going on with black men today. And so we're discussing what every boy needs to know to survive in today's world. So we're going to come down later, and he's going to just lay out some particular things that black boys need to know to survive in today's world. Go ahead. We're going to take a caller.
Okay. A caller from area code 323-365. You're first if you want to make a comment.
Good morning. Yes, Dr. Milligan. I'm just tuning in and listening to your program. I'm a little late, so excuse me. But I just want to. I'm not sure what the topic is. I just happen to be late. So
okay, we're talking about what every boy needs to know. Every black boy, not boy. Every black boy needs to know to survive in today's world. Okay, Keith, go to the next caller. Since she's listening.
Okay, area code 323-804.
Good morning, everyone.
What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. My name is Dr. Andrea Anthony, and I am calling from, right now I'm calling from Paramount, California.
Oh, okay. Local. Okay.
Yes, I am at work, and I've been listening, and I do have a few comments to make.
Okay.
I agree with our guest. He initially started off by talking about how there's villages that are created for girls and to empower them, and the villages for our boys are very slim. So I agree with him on that. He also talked about when these organizations, rites of passage organizations, get the boys. By the time they get them, they are in some sort of trouble at home, or whatever. I personally believe, I'm an educator as well, so I personally believe that that these groups in these villages need to start for our little boys before they start preschool. Because when they get to preschool, 99% of the time, they are around women. We don't have a lot of men that are going into education, so they're around women all the time, specifically for our boys who are in single households with active fathers. If I had the time, I would start an organization like that, so we can get our boys very early so that they can start learning the things that we would like them to learn and to be productive young men. Let's see. He also talked about his son's school, where a lot of his friends are not going to graduate. A lot of them have checked out. I don't have the research in front of me, but research informs us that when children drop out of school, they start dropping out in kindergarten. And it just progresses after that. And then as they grow and mature and matriculate to each grade, they start dropping out more mentally, emotionally. And so those are some key points that I want to make. This is a great topic, and I'm glad I'm a part of it.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. Thank you.
Okay. What do you think about that, Dr. Johnson, about what she says, the boys actually start withdrawing it, even in kindergarten? What do you think about that?
I hadn't heard it presented at that age group. I do know that boys are perceived, in particular black boys, are perceived to be a threat at much younger ages. They're perceived to be older than they are at much younger ages than other groups, especially around 5 or so. But I hadn't heard about them dropping out that early.
I think she means more like a withdrawal, not necessarily dropping out of school.
Social withdrawal.
Social withdrawal.
Yeah, I'm not saying dropping out physically, but mentally, academically, because, we know that a lot of our boys and girls, but specifically our boys, can be challenging at a young age because they learn differently. And so then when they're not allowed to be themselves or to explore and always getting in trouble and being sent home, then they start detaching themselves away from schools mentally and emotionally, because that's not a happy place for them. And so that's what I mean by that.
Let me ask you this, and I don't want me to, get in front of Dr. Johnson. Do you think that boys, especially black boys, should have their own school system?
I totally agree.
I do
totally agree with it. And I've really been trying to encourage people to do that. I honestly believe that would be so effective. And if you don't know about, it's called the Eagle Academy in New York, and that's an all boys school, right in the hood, and they have had success with the boys that come in from the front.
Wow. Okay.
Well, can I respond?
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
Well, there's two things that comes to mind with that. First, when we talk about the withdrawal of boys, one of the things that we don't, I should say there's research on this, but it doesn't always make the conversation. It's not just that they're withdrawing arbitrarily. They're being treated differently. And there's data to support this. There's even recent data that we've seen where, they've used technology to actually track the behavior and even the eye movements of teachers when they're engaging kids. And what they found is that, of course, black boys are punished more for the same actions other kids are doing. I've witnessed this myself, even with my own son. The treatment in school is different. So, yes, black boys, I do think there needs to be, primarily, black male schools. I think the curriculum needs to be laid out for them specifically. And I think, there's been work on this for centuries. I mean, Jawanza Kunjufu, for example, has been laying this out for decades in particular, and it needs to be heeded. But I think it's also about how these boys are being treated. They're not being treated the same way, and they're being not only hyper punished, but even hyper expelled, often for the same behavior as others, and put into special ed in extremely high numbers. And it doesn't always have to do with learning ability. It's often related to behavior. And the inability of some teachers to even be able to see these young men as human, as boys. They see them as a problem. And once you're in that framework, you're already setting them up to be, relegated to the dustbin of productivity. But when we look at this is one of the reasons that I've created what's called the Black Male Political Agenda. And on that agenda, these are policy ideas that come from Black men over the last 3 years or so. And one of those ideas is very much about Black male schools, where the curriculum, the teaching, even the subject matter pertains to Black male life.
And really, Dr. Johnson, it's time that all the talk about this kind of stuff be put into action. When you see what's happening to our Black boys, when you see the destruction, and yet we can't come together and do something about it. You're absolutely right. My grandson lives in Bakersfield, and they have some very prejudiced teachers and atmosphere up there. But if my daughter hadn't have been a chip off the old block who was in that school like she was a student, I said, you can sit there like you are a student. All types of things they do to these kids. And parents, you have no idea that the thing that your boys will not even come and tell you, because they figure it's nothing you can do, or you're not going to do anything about it anyway. You haven't been to PTA meeting. They've never seen you come to the school to check on them. You need to check on them not just when something have happened, when they know that you care. It makes a difference, because if we don't change the school system, we're going to see more of our young men dropping out. They are treated badly. I'm telling you, I've seen it, I've heard it, and we're not doing enough about it. When a teacher walks in that room and they see your blackness, mean that you're hostile. If your voice doesn't sound like the Caucasian voice, if it's a little bit louder, you become threatening to them. Folks, we got some real issues that's destroying our Black boys.
Yeah, that was one of the benefits of being a professor. I was able to sit in on my son's classes even as early as kindergarten. I had more time. I only taught 2 days a week, so the other days when I wasn't writing, I could just kind of float into his class. And it's interesting to see how the teachers and the administrators respond to active Black parents too. That's a whole nother area of conversation. They're not used to it, because most of us, are under a different, kind of situation in terms of income and whatnot. We don't often have the luxury to go sit in a class for 2 hours and just watch. But they respond differently when they know they're going to be held accountable. Still, the behavior of these teachers in many situations, it's very different when it comes to the boys. And I can tell you, they tried to put my son in special ed within 2 weeks of kindergarten. And this boy, within a year of that time frame, was reading 700-page books by himself. He's reading Harry Potter books that his mother used to engage him on, and he was reading them himself. But this is the same young man that they try to put in special ed. And right now he's graduating with a 4.0 GPA and heading to college. The difference wasn't in anything he did. It was in having someone advocate for him against what the teachers were trying to do. And he wasn't really doing anything different than the other kids. I used to document what the kids in the room were doing. And whenever they would come at me with an accusation, I could list off how many kids I saw do various things. And they were not prepared for that. But at the end of the day, that was their treatment of they felt comfortable in doing that.
That's why we need parent watchdogs. You may not have a child in school, but I think we're going to have to understand, I don't have a child there, but there are Black children there. So people who have time really need to see what's going on in these schools. And it's not the most comfortable place for these Black boys. It really is. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. but nobody have spoken out a lot about it. We just been kind of passive about it, but it's real. So, Dr. Johnson, could you give us a few things that for sure that black boys need to know? And I know here, I'm just going to read something from this book that my sister wrote. It's called This Is Not Cool, Legal Lessons for Youth and Teens. One thing I thought was important, she said, is for us to impress upon our young men when it's time to stop and ask questions, when it's time to walk away, and when it's time to run and don't look back. These things we don't talk about. When it's time to ask questions, when it's time to walk away, and when it's time to run and not look back. So I want you to give us some pointers with that, because so many people get caught up with going along to get along. That's one of the things she talked about. Don't want to ruffle the feathers. We see that in a lot of young people. That's how they wind up in trouble. Don't want to be a square when somebody says, come on, man, we just riding. You don't ask where they're going. They could be going to do a robbery. You never ask. You just jump in the car. So give us some pointers that parents should be talking to black boys about.
Well, I'll start with something the caller said toward the end. She was talking about the environments that they're in, where they're around mostly females. And this is very key, especially since the Great Migration. Since the Great Migration, where, once you move to the urban north, right, you have your mother and father are working jobs at different ways, and the majority of your time as a young person is in school. So you're either primarily engaging your mother at home, or mostly female teachers, sometimes over 90% white, depending on the grade. And that's the majority of your time, especially as a young man, right? And that goes all the way through to end of high school. College, you still have, especially now, majority female environment, depending on the area, especially in the humanities, and that can go all the way through graduate school. So the environments themselves are often environments that have really catered to female learning styles, female modes of communication. And this this is not something that's really talked about. So when males trying to buck against it, it's not viewed as a different communication style or a need for a new environment. It's actually viewed as his problem. This is his toxicity, so on and so forth. So part of the issue is the environment, and in that fashion, we actually have to be able to look at young men as, in many ways, being in an almost kind of alien environment that doesn't allow them to express themselves, because they're not the central figure or the person that sets the standard for what the environment should be and who it should cater to. More often than not, that tends to be girls in classrooms, especially that are run by women. So this is part of the issue. And so one of the things I tell young black men, especially, and even boys, I did this with my son when he was very young. I did try to explain that the environment he's in is going to treat him differently, and I try to prepare him for that. This is some of the work you find with James Sedanius, subordinate male target hypothesis. But the focus for me is on letting young boys know it's not an accident. You're not misseeing this. There is a different standard of treatment for you. And we can try to coddle that and dance around it. But the reality is that the longer it takes you to prepare him for that, the more difficult that transition is for him, especially into adulthood, where all of a sudden he's perceived as a threat. My son is 6'10". He wears a size 20 shoe. Probably the sweetest kid you'll ever meet. But what do you think he looks like to a police officer driving down the street at night, just walking home, right? Mm-hmm. They don't see a sweet kid that loves anime and video games. They see a threat. Yeah. And if you don't prepare young black men for how they're perceived in the environment and how they're often mistreated and assumed to be a threat, you're often preparing them for some difficulty. So I start with the reality of the environment they're in, how they're perceived, and how they're treated. And we talk about navigating that. And we try to have open conversations about it to give him a language to articulate what he's going through. Because this is also something I see in schools when it comes to young black males. They don't have a way of articulating their expression. And this is also what leads to frustration and acting out when they can't articulate what's going on. Even as young as 5 in kindergarten classrooms, when they know they're being treated differently, but they do not have the vocabulary to articulate themselves, it often comes out as acting out. And that acting out is used to pathologize them when in actuality, they're trying to respond to something that they don't have the means to communicate. Right? I've witnessed this in my son's classes as well. The difference in how teachers will treat even young black boys. It's something I call tactile approval. This is something I've seen. They'll get up. Teachers will often get up and touch, sometimes even hug kids that are getting the right answer. And even when it comes to black boys and they're asked questions, even when they get the right answer, the teacher will just from across the room say, good job or whatever. Even something as subtle as that, one student getting a hug or getting patted on the shoulder, the black male student just not, just maybe some verbal acknowledgement at best. You'd be surprised how sensitive kids are and how they can pick up on that. So when all of a sudden he's acting out, the parent doesn't know what's going on in the classroom, and all this looks like is that he's just, incapable of controlling himself. But, so that's one of the reasons I started talking with my son to develop a language so that he could articulate what was going on with him and a trust where we can communicate, and he knows that there's nothing he can't tell me that's going to make me push him away or not love him. So creating that environment.
Yeah, and Dr. Jones, it amazed me that parents are hesitant about speaking truth and really letting their children know, well, I don't want them to know about racism because I came up in it. I don't want to talk to them about that. When my daughter went away to go to college, she went to Xavier in New Orleans. If I had not prepared her about what it means, I think we need to have a conversation saying what it means to be black. Yeah. We need to talk about that. What it means to be a black girl, a black boy. So she would have been very confused if I had not taught her about the racism and the difference that can be made. And then she realized, she told me later, she said, Mom, if you had not taught me these things, I would have thought it was something wrong with me because I didn't know people could do these things to students. But because she knew how to recognize when things was not right, it made a difference in her life. So we need to really arm these kids about this. Because it's really, it's going too far. And it's hurting our whole race. It's hurting your whole family when your kids feel like that. And we don't have like shopping school. I remember my son, they told me that he needed to be in special ed, whatever. Took him to, no, he was hyperactive. They didn't use special ed at that time. Took him to his pediatrician. He said, you need to send me the teacher because ain't nothing wrong with this boy. Absolutely nothing. The teachers, they have to learn how to identify with students who are bright students and want to do something. He doesn't want to just sit there. He's finished his work and other kids are struggling. So you have to do something with kids like that. And my son is really like a genius. These kids don't have wood shop. They don't have auto mechanic. Now, Dr. Johnson, this has a lot to do. Do you realize how excited a lot of these young men, like 12 and 13 and 15 would be if they had wood shop, if they had auto mechanic, if they had something, a different curriculum?
Absolutely. I used to be an assistant dean at the Claremont Colleges just outside of L.A. In the Inland Valley. And I can tell you how many people brought their kids there. And this goes to your point about them not teaching them about racism. Many of them felt like they lived it. They didn't want their kids to go through it. But by the time their kids reached college age, they realized how much they were not prepared, how much they had not prepared their kids for it. So they came. I worked in the Office of Black Student Affairs. They used to try to get us to give their kids the whole black experience, because they hadn't and they didn't know how. And many of those kids were not prepared for their treatment. I remember students were coming in getting, nooses on their dorm room doors and, so on. They were not prepared on how to deal with that. And so that became a difficult 4 years because that was their introduction and crash course in racism and the black experience. So you're definitely, speaking truth to that. The other thing I was going to say, though, as far as, talking to black boys and what we should do to prepare them, one of the things I also tell them, especially young men, is you also have to learn how to be prepared for time periods where you got to stand alone, where everybody's going to stand against you. And I talk to them about that, and I use different techniques to try and get at younger men. One of the things that I've been talking about recently is this recent Spider-Man movie when it comes to this young black male who's playing the main character. And there are moments where he has to stand alone and nobody really, stands with him. Young black boys, and young black males learn that, this time comes earlier for them than others. And that's, in many ways that they need to be prepared for that. But I try and prepare them for that. We try to have conversations about expectations of emotional labor, the things that they're going to be expected to do for other people around them, whether it's in intimate relationships or strangers. Like, for example, as a young black male, I learned very early, I had to be almost entirely responsible for how white folk looked at me at the cost potentially of my own life. And this is not something that I'm suggesting is fair or something that you should have to do, but unfortunately, it is a reality. If you are not cognizant of how other people perceive you, you can find yourself under threat and you haven't really done anything. You could just be sitting there on the bus. But if other people perceive you as a threat, so you actually have to find ways to engage people, sometimes to have conversations, sometimes to monitor your own facial expressions, your own presentation. It's unfortunate, but this can easily be a life-death situation. So having them be prepared for how others see them and giving them techniques to offset that. Sometimes it can be as simple as, engaging them in a conversation, engaging people. It can be as simple as making sure your hands are visible at different moments. We always have this talk with our young men about being pulled over and where to put their hands on the steering wheel or on the dash so that they're visible. These are things, unfortunately, that come with black male life. Being somewhat having to be responsible for other people's perceptions of you. It's an unfair dynamic, but it can cost you your life if you don't know how to do it. If you don't have any
your dress, right, Dr. Johnson?
Absolutely.
Even in that dress, my father used to talk to us, and I would say things like, "Well, Daddy, that doesn't make sense." And you know what his response was, and I give the same one to my children. He said, "Baby, I'm not talking." I said, "That's not right the way they're doing it." He said, "I'm not talking about what's right. I'm telling you what is." That's powerful, isn't it?
It absolutely is.
I'm not talking about what's right, baby. I'm telling you what is. Mm-hmm. That's how we have to deal with our children.
And I know we're probably not going to have time to get into it, but in my book, one of the things I cover is the weaponization of the family against black males, even from a young age. And this is something that I argue has been facilitated through institutions that we all access, again, from family court well, we can talk about that in terms of education. But my point is also letting these young men know that even families is something that the very idea of creating family is something that can be weaponized against you very early. So being very responsible for what you do sexually, being very responsible for, what situations you put yourself in, because it can be used in a way that can be very difficult, especially for a young black male trying to transition into manhood. But, that level of responsibility, because, again, you have a history of institutions that don't tend to see black males as human. They tend to see them as problems. They tend to see them as an impediment. So I talk to them about that. But as far as the positives, one of the things that I think needs to be impressed upon people in regard to black males is it's key that these young men have a base of support not only emotionally, but even financially. In the reality that we're moving into, how do you navigate and prepare your young man for adulthood, to stand on his own 2 feet? What kind of support mechanisms do you put in place to transition him into that? And what role do you have for a collective of men to help him with that transition? These are all part of the dynamic to transition these young boys. But it starts with a base of support. It starts with, being able to create an environment around him where he has resources, he has people he can reach out to, talk to, dialogue with, but also people that have expectations of him to be able to rise to the occasion. Not unrealistic expectations, but expectations suitable for his age and context that urge him to move forward, but knowing he doesn't have to do that with no support at all. Right? These are necessary.
Do you think they would rather hear that from a male?
Well, I definitely think that's a central component of that. I mean, but obviously, it's got to come from whomever is there. But, if you make sure that you have males in his life, if his father in particular is not able to be there for one reason or another, and that's a whole nother conversation Because sometimes what I talk to young men about, or actually older men for that matter, is that there's often a necessary conversation they need to have with father figures or fathers that isn't necessarily something that happens. Recently, we've seen a number of videos from Tupac's father as an example of what I'm referring to. He's just come out very recently and had conversations, and he talked about how he was kept from his son by a Afeni, right? Well-respected, revolutionary black woman in the community. They were both in the Panther Party together, but even he is talking about how he wasn't able to see his son. You know what I mean? He didn't, so these kind of conversations need to be had. And I tell young men and men who haven't engaged their father that there's a point where you need to sit down with your father. You need to understand the context, because often you've heard the story from one vantage point. And sometimes a father might pull out a box of receipts to show you that story is more complex than what you may have been given. So the necessity of having that network of men, but also that connection with father, that doesn't always happen.
Absolutely. Give us the name of your book again.
Yeah. Please give us the name of the book first.
And how we can get it.
Okay, hold on 1 second. My
new caller, go ahead. Okay. Yeah,
804.
We're going to have to do, Dr. Johnson definitely going to have to come back, because I want to talk about what we need to be talking to these boys about when it comes to money, sex, and dating.
Definitely.
So it's a big topic.
Okay. So, Dr. Johnson, can I get you back?
Oh, please. I'm happy to come back. And by the way, the book title is Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry, Flat Blackness, and Black Male Death, The Black Masculinist Turn. And it's available on Routledge. It can be pre-ordered in July, comes out in August.
Okay. Email that to me, because I want to promote it and definitely want to have it in my bookstore. But we really need to come back and talk about money, sex, and dating, because that's a hard hitter for our young men. It's so sad when I see them, having babies, pregnating someone at 16, what that means to their life. We need to look at that, because it's just something that we got to do right now. So we're just going to have to, do it. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just telling you.
804, you got last question?
Well, this is Dr. Anthony. I had to get off, but I just came back in.
Okay.
But, I wanted to ask about the book. And I'm sorry if I missed it, but is Dr. Johnson, are you in the state of California or in another state?
Yeah, I'm at Fresno State.
Fresno State.
Yeah, Fresno State in the Africana Studies Department.
I'll be talking with Dr. Rosie because I think we probably need to host an event here in the Los Angeles area.
We want to bring him down. I know what you're saying. Yeah, we need to do that.
Yeah. All right.
I'd be honored. I appreciate that. And I hope I can catch Keith in person. I don't know if that's possible.
You can't catch his AI.
I don't know if that happens at all, but I want to try and find it.
You just want the money. That's what you want. I see your move.
Dr. Johnson, it's so wonderful having you. We're definitely going to do real soon. I really wanted to dive into talking about the black boy. Yeah, because they started at a very early age. I mean, these little girls just pulling them right on into it. And they don't ask, the men are not asked the question, are you ready to begin a family? These young girls just started when they get ready, because I want to have a baby by you, because you got curly hair, you doing this. It's a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to get down to the nitty gritty. It's time to go back to the old landmark and teach our kids so they can be successful. I mean, it's hard to make it when you got a college degree and trying to start a family, but you got a baby and you're 17, haven't even finished high school, and you talk about expectation. They expect you to do everything for that baby. Even the mama's paying, well, where's the daddy? You know the daddy didn't have no job when he got your daughter pregnant. So why are you pulling these unrealistic expectations? So maybe you parents on both sides need to decide that you guys going to take care of that baby, because both of you all produced it. Come on, they really still think that boy 17 should buy all the milk and all the Pampers. They don't care where he's getting the money from. Am I right, Dr. Johnson?
Definitely. And there's something I call the male relationship emotional labor dynamic that we got to talk about as well. Expectations of men that are non-material that we're not trained for. So we got to have that conversation too.
I think we just gonna we're gonna need to have a conference. Dr. Andre, we're gonna have to put that together, okay?
Okay, I'm on it.
All right. Dr. Johnson, is there a number you want to give us, or email, how the people can contact you?
I think the easiest way is thasanjohnson.com. You can email me through there. You can also support the Onyx Report on YouTube. That's the show I do there. You can go to the Institute for Black Male Studies. That's an online institute that I've developed. And then, of course, there's the Onyx Network TV, which you can download on iPhone or Android. And you can actually check out the shows that I put up there. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you again for being here with us. And I mean, real soon, we're coming back. We're going to get into some of the things that matters the most and that's most crippling to our young men when it comes to sex and money. So again, I want to thank you, and we'll do this again.
Thank you,
I'll
Dr.
tune into your shows as soon as that book come out. You said it'll be ready in August?
It's out in August.
Okay. But we may want to get you down here before then. Okay.
I appreciate it, and shout out to Interlight Radio. Check the Onyx Report right here on Interlight Radio if you get a chance.
All righty. Thank you. And the clock on the wall said that's all. So, folks, we have had a great show. We've gotten a lot of good information. So start looking and check it out. You know, your boys, they're reared by a female. They go to school. They have a female teacher. They go to church. Their Sunday school teachers are female. While the only thing they have seen a male really do is standing in the pulpit. That's why so many of our black boys, that seem to be the vocation for them, is to be a preacher. Don't call up here, you guys. See, Keith, somebody's going to call me. When I talk like this, they put, Dr. Johnson, I've gotten put out of so many churches down here.
Oh
yeah. It's a lot of them I can't go to. They say they don't like what I say. Yeah, because I do say a lot of black men, and they see the easiest thing they can be is a preacher. That's what they aspire. That's what they have seen as success, and with money, a preacher, a ball player, or entertainer. Yes, I said it. Don't send me no note. I'm going to say it next week. When y'all start sending me notes, I'm going to start repeating what y'all don't like. So y'all best to leave me alone. That's what I'm talking about. Dr. Johnson, you guys have a great day, and maybe somebody let me in the church door this Sunday. All right. Y'all have a great